Welcome to Activate Worcester. I'm Ron Mata. This is my co-host, Sandy Williamson. And we have a very, very unique guest tonight. This is our 8th show. And each one has been, I'm going to call it, very localized and very Worcester-centric. Tonight will be Worcester-centric in the conclusion portion of it. But it's really beyond Worcester. It's beyond the United States. It's international. And we have an individual who has a perspective that very, very few have. He's a very articulate guy who will say some things that you may find uncomfortable but important to hear. Sandy, tell us about our guest, please.
Well, our guest tonight continues the theme of Activate Worcester, but as you point out, from a slightly different angle. Pavel Lovin is here tonight to talk to us about what he's seen and knows of other countries in different parts of the world. He was actually born in Moscow, as you point out, not Moscow, Idaho, but in Russia, and emigrated to the U.S. in 1996. He's an electrical engineer who writes software. And he's married and has 3 children, and they live in West Boylston. And Pavel has a different viewpoint on activating Worcester than maybe we've heard from other people, and as you point out,
that's why he's here.
Maybe a little uncomfortable and a little bit different viewpoint than others might have.
We heard, Sandy and I heard Pavel speak a couple years ago at a business function that we were both at. And other than seeing Pavel around and being a nice guy, I really wasn't aware of his subject matter, nor were any of the people in the room. Pavel spoke for well over an hour, and I wish we had that time to do justice to what he has to present, but we don't. And then beyond that, he answered questions for about 30 minutes, and as I said, it was very, very painful. The truths that he was expressing to us were very, very painful. And there's a reason that he was doing this, not just for shock value. And with that, Pavel, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And share with us your knowledge.
Thank you very much for inviting me here.
Our pleasure.
I was born in Moscow, in Soviet Union, and I immigrated here to America. And I've been a citizen for 10 years. And I work around here in Massachusetts. I'm here to give a little bit of a history perspective on several things, especially big organizations, and one of which is a government, and how that government may get out of control. And it seems like every time it happens on top of some kind of turmoil or very difficult situation in the country, frequently after like a massive diseases or something like that. And then a group of people comes that promises everything you ever wanted to hear. And that's what actually happened in Russia, unfortunately. And a lot of people believed it, and a lot of people paid an unimaginable price for being such a trustful people. And of course, another myth which seems to be not true is that big changes come at once and very suddenly, and they're really not. For example, like Russian Revolution, they claim that it was an event in some October, a long time ago, and everything was quite smooth, a few turbulences, but overall everything went really well, and country now is a lot stronger than it would have been ever, and stuff like that. Looking at the events that preceded the Russian Revolution and then afterwards, you may get a different picture of it. A lot of stuff started long before a revolution, which was around 20s in 1918, and a lot of significant changes started about 15 years prior to that. They had some problems, of course. They had a monarchy which was kind of disconnected from everybody. They had the monarchy was rich, people were not so. I found that the average workday was 11 hours, and as a break on Saturday it was 10. And people worked really hard, and at some point I guess some frustration accumulated out there. And here you go, it took about 10 years from there. The war happened, the First World War, and it was a big strain on already depleted resources. Men were not helping at home, they were fighting somewhere else, dying. A lot of diseases, and it was difficult, very difficult time. And then several parties appeared that were competing for
Control.
populist opinion and for control. And one of them happened to be such party that promised almost literally, if you are a farmer, you will have land. If you are a worker, you will have a factory. And everyone's supposed to be all set and very happy. And after all these years of frustration and uncertainty and waste and all these wars and diseases and everything, people thought, what a great idea. Finally, we found something we can work for. And in 1918, that party took power. And that's if you try to look for information on the internet, these events that happen in the country, they are going in big benchmarks, like some party took power and then something else happened, like thousands of strikes and stuff like that. But very little information is there how actually people were going through it, the regular people in villages and towns, like our town here in Worcester. You know, how do you get gas every day? Do you have money for the gas? What do you do? Where you go? And very little of that information, which would be very easy to relate to, is out there. So I was trying to find something like that, and unfortunately didn't find much, but some memories of what my parents and my grandparents were saying, although they didn't say much about those times, but I have an idea how horrible it all was.
Share some of that with us.
So that, for example, well, let's start with the beginning of their power at 1918. For some reason, approximately 2 months after they took power, the strict passport regime was established. So people were prevented from going places immediately.
Leaving the country or just
They,
within the country itself?
you couldn't even move around. Granted though that there was a civil war at that time, because they took power on premises that their opposition could not take. And a lot of people understood that it's just what looks to be too good to be true. It probably is. And there was a civil war and a lot of turmoil. But that party that took power on all these promises, for some reason, immediately started implementing something that nobody even expected to happen, like this passport regime. Then it turned out that all these military activities, of course, take a lot of manpower, and those men don't work. They need food, and there was no food around. So without a long wait, they organized so-called food scout commands. And this is not literal translation, but essentially it was a bunch of people, armed people, go around villages taking away food. And I was imagining myself being one of those peasants, with a family, and the winter is coming, and the last grain is being taken for whatever beautiful common goal they were striving for, because if you're a farmer, remember, you had to get land. If you're a worker, you had to get job, and everything will be provided to you. So they started taking away food so they can accomplish those goals, I suppose.
So this collectivism we're looking at.
Well, yeah, and then they encountered somewhat resistance. Common people would be resisting this stuff, and they would hide the food, and some would group up in gangs to resist. That wasn't expected by the regime, or it was, but it was dealt with very, very harshly. And for example, Lenin himself, I found it, wrote a telegram, which now is called hanging order, and he said something like this: "Comrades, the insurrection of five Kulak districts." Kulaks were middle class in the villages. Those were farmers, successful farmers. And they came up with that Kulak word, which means feast, which implies those people were holding to what they have, and they wouldn't share, and they are bad people in general, and so we have to get rid of them. And so he said that get rid of them, because 5 districts should be their resistance in those 5 districts should be pitilessly suppressed. The interests of the whole revolution require this. The last decisive battle with the kulaks is now underway everywhere, and example must be demonstrated. And then he said, hang, and make sure that the hanging takes place in full view of the people. No fewer than 100 known landlords, rich men, bloodsuckers. publish their names, seize all their grain from them, designate hostages in accordance with yesterday's telegram, blah, 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 yours, Lenin. And
Oh, boy. Isn't it interesting that there's a parallel between that and the current mantra of tax the rich? They're the ones that are evil. They're the ones that are holding back from those who have not. In this country, basically almost 100 years later from what took place in Russia back in the 20s.
absolutely, seems to be that correlation is quite clear. Whether it is a true correlation, is it the same thing, or is just happened to be coincidence, but it's strikingly similar.
Nothing new about class warfare.
Yeah, and now
About the French Revolution.
2 years, it took them 2 years to fight off opposition, the armed opposition. And after that, in 1922, Lenin decided, I think that the state of the country was such desperate that he wasn't sure if he's going to be there another day. So he came up with a clever thing. He called it a new economic order. It's called what is it? New economic policy. That's what it was. And new economic policy allowed small businesses to exist.
In other words, small businesses were
Oh yeah, by that time it was all
gone.
nationalized.
Everything was nationalized.
Absolutely, everything was nationalized.
And what is this, the late 20s now we're looking at? Early 30s?
No, it is 18 to 20, it was 18 to 22. So 4 years of that nightmare, everything was nationalized. There was no industry or business that wasn't
by the government.
run by the government. And so having no output out of that system, they depleted themselves to the point where they probably couldn't survive anymore. But that's my speculation. Mm-hmm. But it seems to be like 4 years of complete disaster would do it. And in 2022, he established this new economic policy which stated you can have your own business and you can actually be a little farmer or something. All big industries were still nationalized, but small ones were allowed to go. And things went so fast, so good. However, in this time, especially 21 and 22, 5 million people lost their lives to famine.
Wow.
It's just imagine if back then Russia wasn't as populous country, probably 100 million, maybe even less than that. Mm-hmm. So it was probably 10% or 5% of population just lost to hunger because they couldn't feed themselves.
To put that in perspective, we have roughly 300 million in this country that we know of. 5% would be 15 million, 10% would be double that. Imagine that parallel.
Yeah, it was very, very significant impact. And well, don't forget what we started with. It was all for people. And it was done to make lives of everybody around better. Mm-hmm. That's what it was for, and that's what people signed up for. It didn't turn out that way quite. So for 6 years they allowed this new economic policy to thrive, and they had, you can read accounts of menus in the restaurants and what kind of product were made, and it's a lot. and it was a lot of difference. Although big businesses were not allowed to even exist, they were all run by
government.
all run by government.
And the productivity slipped because of it.
But
the incentive wasn't there.
In 10 years since it went really bad first. Like in the first year or two after these food requisitions, the food production went like twice less, 50% of what it was, and it recovered somewhat to 1930s, but it was still 30% less than it was prior to all these calamities.
A couple of things that I seem to remember, a little bit of research that I've done. Back in the 19th century, Russia was a manufacturing power. They were really big with locomotives and big turbines and that sort of thing. And they were well known as a manufacturer of those types of products. And as this whole process continued down the track, so to speak, to use that as a parallel, the more you disincentivized people to work for their own benefit, the less productivity you got. Initially, you did it from the perspective of do it for the common good, and then you're going to get the boot, on your neck if you don't perform. Now, Pavel's knowledge of this is encyclopedic, and we could go on, as I say, for many hours. But one of the things that I recall when Pavel spoke before our group was he didn't look at this simply as information from dusty pages of something that happened 75 or 100 years ago. His perspective, and he had lots and lots of time to articulate it, is that he saw many of these same factors beginning to present themselves in this country. Maybe you want to express that a little bit for us.
Well, the most striking one, of course, is when the government tells me that it's going to take care of me, I get real chills. It sounds, however sweet it might sound to others, to me it sounds like Russia of 30s and 40s and 50s and 20s, and you just keep going. And each of those decades, it's another generation. Mm-hmm. You get no life, your kids get no life, their kids get no life, and maybe those who benefited from some of it initially, I'm sure they were sorry looking at the state their kids got into. And maybe when we make decisions about this stuff, we should probably think about it too a little bit, how it's going to affect everybody else in the future. Mm-hmm. Of course, we can take care of everybody if we work hard and we're productive. We can make anything. Look at America, look at the cars, blue jeans, everything. We can do everything around the world. Software, tractors, anything.
Absolutely.
It can be done. However, when productive people have no incentive, it becomes very, very different for everybody. And maybe it's not only incentive, but also an oppression. Because once you sign up for one beautiful goal, you sign up also a fine print that your goals aren't there anymore.
It's our goals.
It becomes somebody else's goal.
Yeah.
And it might not be what you like. Or that goal is going to ride like a big tractor over you. You don't know. I'm driving one of the towns nearby here, and suddenly I see a sign on the road. right to farm community. And again, it wasn't even funny, because to me it is scary. What is it? People live on land, and they have to proclaim their right to have a cow on it or something, or farm. So it means that already oppression is being enforced on them for one reason or another, and they cannot have freely a farm. They need to post a sign on the road that that's what they are that's what they stand for. Mm-hmm. It is beyond my understanding. And of course, to finish all this Russian history stuff, after all these repressions and new economic policy which revived the country a little bit, of course they gained enough power to crank wherever they wanted. Mm-hmm. And by 1937, which was considered to be the worst year of all, where people were arrested day and night, picked off the street. And it seems to be too bad, and I'm very sorry that their goals were not accomplished.
One of the goals we have on this show is, well, it says so in the title, Activate Worcester. We've talked about loss of freedoms and so on and so forth. From your perspective, the viewing audience, what are some of the things that they can do to hopefully forestall this in our country today?
It's all about resources. So you want to help yourself, and if you want to be effective, you need to know your representatives, mm-hmm. who they are, and what they do with their money.
With our money.
With our money. And you have to make sure that they know you, and they know your opinion. And if they promise something that sounds to be too good to be true, probably
is. No free lunch.
And that's actually the theme from the show that we did prior to this one. You got to be active.
Get
Make
involved.
sure that your elected representatives know who you are and how you feel about what they're doing.
That's great.
And don't let them up.
I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll have subsequent shows. I don't know if any of them will be at this level with this man's knowledge, but great having you here. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Ron Mata speaking for